In the generations after the flood, humanity walked upon a world still wet with memory. Mountains bore scars of receding waters, valleys were freshly carved, and the air itself seemed to carry the echo of judgment. Yet, into this trembling newborn earth stepped a people determined not to repeat the terror their fathers survived. They wanted security, stone, structure, dominion, permanence. And above all, they wanted unity, a unity so absolute it could stand as a shield against heaven itself. For though the waters had dried, the fear of divine intervention still haunted the hearts of men. It is in this soiled fear, ambition, and a desire to control destiny that the idea of the Tower of Babel first began to grow. Humanity still spoke a single language then, a perfect and unbroken thread linking villages, caravans, tribes, and nations still in the womb. Communication flowed like water, no barriers, no misinterpretations, no cultural fractures. With one tongue, they built, commanded, celebrated, plotted, and dreamed. This unity gave them a sense of unstoppable momentum, an intoxicating feeling that nothing in heaven or earth could restrain them. As families multiplied and moved eastward, they found in the land of Shinar a vast plain, flat as an unrolled scroll, ready to hold the weight of whatever vision they dared to craft. But unity alone does not build towers. Behind the rise of the early post-flood world stood a man whose shadow stretched across the whole land, Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. But before in this context does not simply mean in God's sight. Many ancient interpreters understood it to signify opposition, defiance, someone who stood in the face of God, confronting him with ambition, sharpened like a spear. Nimrod was not merely a hunter of beasts, he was a hunter of loyalty, influence, authority. He captured human allegiance with charisma and violence alike, weaving tribes into a single political machine under his rule. His cities, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, rose as monuments to centralized power, but they were only the beginning of his vision. To rule people completely, Nimrod understood he needed more than armies. He needed ideology. He needed a myth big enough to swallow the fear of divine judgment and replace it with confidence in human achievement. Stories began to spread. Stories Nimrod himself encouraged that the flood had been a freak cosmic event, a tragedy of nature, not an act of moral judgment. He taught that humans could master the heavens, protect themselves, secure their own future. And it was in this climate of bold, thinly veiled rebellion that the idea first crystallized. Build a tower so unimaginable in height, so glorious and impregnable that no future judgment could ever reach them again. But the tower was not only a refuge, it was a rallying cry. By convincing the people that their unity could rival divine power, Nimrod created a shared identity built on pride. They feared scattering, feared losing the strength that came from speaking with one voice. And so, the building of the city became the building of a new world order, one empire, one leader, one ideology, one unbreakable center of gravity. Shinar began to buzz with activity. Brick kilns roared day and night. Fires glowed red against the horizon. Smoke curled like serpents toward the sky. Workers molded clay bricks and baked them until they shone with a hardened sheen. Bitumen, the black tar of the earth, became mortar, thick and permanent. Everything about the construction was revolutionary. No loose stones, no fragile mud walls, but an engineered structure, durable and flame-resistant, almost unearthly in its precision. Still, beneath the practical motive of security and the political motive of centralization, burned a deeper spiritual motive. The tower was not simply an earthly skyscraper, it was a ziggurat, a stairway of invocation, a ritual mountain meant to pull the boundary between earth and heaven thin. They wanted to carve a channel of influence into the celestial realm. They wanted to anchor themselves in the heavens, to claim a share of power reserved for the divine. The early world understood the tower as an axis mundi, an axis of the world, a structure linking the realm of humans to the realm of gods. Nimrod was building not just a monument, but a throne, a cosmic throne, one that could elevate humanity, and especially himself, into the sphere of divinity. And so the people gathered, builders, masons, priests, hunters, artisans, all pulling toward a single purpose. The plains of Shinar transformed into a colossal construction site, alive with chanting, hammering, prayers, and commands. The sun rose each day over a growing mass of red bricks, each layer a declaration. We will not be scattered. We will not be judged again. We will ascend. People felt unstoppable. They felt immortal. Their unity, once a gift, became a weapon. Yet humanity did not realize that the very thing giving them strength, the single language, was the same thing driving them toward the brink of catastrophic pride. They had forgotten the lessons of the flood, that corruption begins quietly, not loudly, that rebellion often looks like innovation, that the line between progress and arrogance is crossed when humans attempt to replace humility with self-made divinity. They believed they were securing the future, but in truth, they were constructing the stage for their own downfall. The world before the Tower of Babel was a world of incredible potential that could have built civilizations rooted in gratitude and reverence. Instead, guided by a leader hungry for his own glory, the people of Shinar turned their gifts into tools of rebellion. Unity became uniformity. Progress became idolatry. Ambition became defiance. And through it all, God watched not with fear, but with the sorrow of a father seeing his children repeat a mistake that once drowned the world. This is the world in which the tower rises, a world striving to escape heaven's authority, a world building not with faith, but with fear, not with gratitude, but with pride, a world marching brick by brick toward divine intervention once again. The tower did not rise in silence. Every layer, every brick, every command shouted across the plain carried the pulse of a civilization transforming itself into something unrecognizable. What began as an attempt to secure unity soon evolved into a system of total control. Nimrod understood something the people did not. Language itself was power. As long as one tongue ruled the land, one ideology could dominate every thought, every prayer, every expression of desire. The single language of the world, once a divine gift, had become the foundation of an empire driven not by faith, but by fear and ambition. To truly grasp why God intervened, one must understand what the people of Shinar were attempting to build, not simply an immense structure of brick, but a spiritual weapon. Ancient tradition suggests that within the tower, priests loyal to Nimrod were experimenting with forbidden rituals, attempting to summon celestial beings or influence divine forces through the concentration of human unity. The ziggurat was more than stone. It was a hybrid of political propaganda, religious rebellion, and technological innovation. It was humanity's first coordinated attempt to manipulate the heavenly order. Inside the lower chambers, murals depicted a future where humanity dominated not only Earth, but the skies themselves. Men painted scenes of storm gods bound in chains, of humanity claiming the throne of heaven. In their minds, the flood had proven that the divine realm was vulnerable. If water could extinguish a world, then perhaps humans could rise high enough to defend themselves against future threats. The tower, therefore, became a monument to security through defiance, a cosmic bunker forged from arrogance. Nimrod fueled this ideology by reframing the flood as an act of violence committed by an unreliable deity. His speeches were fire in human form. If heaven once destroyed us, heaven can destroy us again, unless we rise, unless we build, unless we conquer. His greatest achievement was not inspiring loyalty, it was inspiring fear so deep that entire nations agreed to follow him unchecked. In that fear, they gave him divine authority. Families who once prayed to the God of Noah now prayed to the tower. Children were raised to view Shinar as the center of the world, the pillar that held destiny together. Craftsmen swore oaths to Nimrod instead of to their ancestors. Even the elders, those who remembered the stories of mercy and salvation, buried their doubts under the weight of public expectation. It became dangerous to question, dangerous to imagine alternatives. Unity had curdled into oppression. The higher the tower rose, the more the spiritual atmosphere of Shinar changed. Travelers approaching from distant lands reported that the air around the structure felt unnaturally heavy, as if saturated with the combined will of thousands. At night, fires burned atop the unfinished levels, casting a bloody glow across the horizon. Priests claimed the smoke carried human prayers upward, forcing the heavens to acknowledge them. Others whispered that the smoke carried curses. One ancient commentary says that at its height, the tower became a center of occult experimentation. Astronomers attempted to map the movement of stars to predict divine action. Chemists extracted rare minerals from deep clay beds to create pigments believed to grant mystical insight. The uppermost level, still under construction, was intended to house a shrine where sacrifices would be performed not to God, but to the deified ideal of human supremacy. What God saw, therefore, was not a building. It was a civilization accelerating toward spiritual self-destruction. The people were not reaching for heaven out of devotion, they were reaching for heaven out of fear, defiance, and a desire to break free from divine authority altogether. Humanity had forgotten that the last destruction came not because they lacked defense, but because they lacked righteousness. The danger was not the height of the tower, nor the unity of the people. The danger was what that unity was being used for. When all humanity shares one mind, one voice, one ideology, rebellion spreads faster than wildfire. Corruption becomes universal. Evil becomes streamlined. The world that God had rebuilt after the flood stood on the brink of repeating the same sins that once drowned it. Divine intervention then was not punishment. It was prevention. God descended an action described with chilling simplicity, to observe the tower, not because he did not know its purpose, but to demonstrate the closeness of divine presence at the moment of human pride. Heaven did not tremble. Heaven evaluated. And what it saw was a future where humanity, united in defiance, might plunge the world into a new catastrophe far worse than the flood. Confusion of languages was not an act of cruelty, nor a strike against human progress. It was a surgical act of mercy. By fracturing the single unified language, God dissolved Nimrod's ideological empire instantly. The power structure collapsed. Construction stopped. Workers no longer understood commands. Families gathered in clusters, gravitating toward those who spoke the same new tongue. And in that moment, the spell of human rebellion shattered. The tower stood unfinished, a monument to the limits of human arrogance. But more importantly, the world was saved from a future where one tyrant could unite all people in a war against heaven itself. Scattered nations would struggle, yes, but they would also be free. Diversity of languages became a safeguard against universal corruption. Thus, the destruction of the Tower of Babel was not simply a divine reaction to pride, it was the necessary intervention that prevented a second global catastrophe. Humanity had reached a threshold where ambition had mutated into idolatry, where unity had mutated into slavery, where progress had mutated into rebellion. And so the tower fell not by earthquake or fire, but by the simplest, most elegant judgment imaginable. The inability to communicate, words became barriers, sentences became mysteries, confusion became salvation. The tower still stands in human memory, not as an ancient ruin, but as a warning, a reminder that not every dream is sacred, a reminder that unity without humility becomes tyranny, a reminder that God intervenes not only in wrath, but in mercy, especially when humanity stands on the edge of destroying both itself and its relationship with the divine. In the ancient world, the Tower of Babel rose like a colossal spear aimed directly at the throne of heaven. But long before the divine judgment fell, there were signs, subtle at first, then thunderous, that the ambitions of humanity had spiraled far beyond mere unity. The people no longer built to honor the God who had formed them, they built to replace him. Their tower became a monument to defiance, a golden pillar of collective pride, shimmering in the sun like a beacon announcing rebellion to the skies. As the construction climbed higher, the atmosphere shifted. The murmurs of workers became chants, and chants became proclamations. "Let us make a name for ourselves," they cried, their voices echoing across the plains. Their unity, once a gift, had morphed into a weapon. Brick by brick, they raised the tower not for worship, but for domination. They believed that through their combined will, they could storm the heavens, seize the divine realm, and enthrone themselves as gods. That blasphemous intention did not go unnoticed. Scripture describes God coming down to observe the tower. But this was not a casual visit. This was the moment heaven shifted. A divine council assembled, radiant beings gathering in solemn contemplation as the earth trembled beneath their presence. What they saw was not a building, but the birth of a new theology, a human-made order in which mankind ruled, unrestrained, unbroken, unanswerable to anything above them. Such unity, stripped of humility, becomes the most dangerous force in existence. Humanity had forgotten that the power to create was borrowed, not owned. Their vision was immaculate, but corrupt. They imagined a world where one language, one law, one throne, their own, would dominate creation. They believed that if they bound themselves tightly enough, nothing could stop them. And they were right. That was the danger. The destruction of the Tower of Babel was not anger. It was protection, not punishment, prevention. Heaven understood something humanity did not. A single, united civilization, driven by boundless ambition and unrestrained pride, would eventually destroy itself. The tower was merely the symptom of a deeper sickness, a sickness that could grow into tyranny on a scale the world had never seen. So the divine decision was made. On the morning of the intervention, the sky darkened not with storm, but with radiance. A heavenly presence descended, unseen yet unmistakable. Workers at the top of the tower suddenly heard unfamiliar sounds, words twisted in their mouths, meanings dissolved, and orders transformed into chaos. What one man shouted, another could not understand. What one worker requested, another interpreted as an insult. Confusion rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Tools were dropped, arguments erupted, families separated, entire groups fled in fear as their neighbors suddenly spoke what sounded like the language of distant nations. The once unified city cracked apart in an instant. The tower's rising rhythm died. Its greatness no longer symbolized unity, but failure. The construction site fell silent, a monument to the moment humanity's ambition collided with divine wisdom. People scattered across the earth in tribes, carrying their fragmented languages like seeds. Kingdoms formed, cultures developed. The world diversified, not as punishment, but as a safeguard against the catastrophic potential of a single human empire. The Tower of Babel was not destroyed because mankind built high. It was destroyed because mankind forgot why it was created at all. In their arrogance, they aimed for the heavens. In His mercy, God brought them back to earth. The ruins of the tower remained as a testimony, a silent warning carved into the landscape, a reminder that unity without righteousness becomes tyranny, and ambition without humility becomes destruction. Humanity would eventually build empires again, Egypt, Babylon, Rome, but none would ever erase the memory of the day heaven intervened. For the real reason behind the destruction of the Tower of Babel was not wrath, but restraint. God stopped humanity not from climbing too high physically, but from falling too low spiritually. Their tower was tall, but their hearts were hollow. And so the nations spread, the languages multiplied, and humanity was given another chance to seek not their own glory, but the glory of the one who had shaped them from dust. The ruins of the tower did not fall in a single moment. They decayed slowly, like a wound that never healed. In the aftermath of the divine intervention, when languages burst apart like shattered glass and humanity scattered in terrified confusion, the great city of Babel, once the symbol of all human unity, became a monument of silence. Its half-built terraces, once bright with ambition, now stood empty beneath the blazing sun. No songs of labor echoed there, no hammers rose, no voices aligned. Only wind moved through the hollow scaffoldings, whispering in hundreds of tongues that no longer understood one another. And yet, in that silence, something remarkable happened. The people began to see their own reflection. As tribes formed and routes diverged, many stopped to ask questions they had never dared to contemplate. Why had this happened? Why had the sky itself intervened against them? They remembered the moment the heavens shimmered, the air thickened, and the voices changed, not as an explosion of wrath, but as a deliberate, precise act. It had not been destruction for the sake of punishment. It had been a boundary drawn to prevent a darker future. Far from Babel, countless groups settled in valleys, mountains, coasts, and plains, each reshaping their identity around the language they had inherited in that chaotic moment. These languages became the seeds of cultures, myths, rituals, and memories. What had begun as divine disruption blossomed into the richness of humanity's diversity, though few understood this at first. Many saw only loss, the loss of a common purpose, the loss of a singular direction, the loss of the dream of reaching heaven with their own strength. But the deeper reason behind the divine act was whispered among the few who carried memory vividly. They remembered the look in the eyes of Babel's overseers, those who had transformed unity into oppression. The project had never been about worship or creativity. It was about control. The leaders had intended to chain the people together under one language, one ideology, one unbreakable system. They wanted to prevent scattering not out of fear of chaos, but fear of losing power. They had weaponized unity. They had caged human freedom in the name of progress. The tower was not a bridge to the divine. It was a prison disguised as a miracle. As the scattered tribes grew into nations, some clung to the memory of Babel with resentment. They cursed the heavens for dividing them, unaware that the very division had saved their souls from tyranny. Others, humbled by the event, recognized that the unity they had once cherished had been corrupted, hollowed out by arrogance, and only a few, realized that the destruction of the tower was not the destruction of unity itself, but the destruction of the false unity built on pride. Generations passed. People forgot the shape of the original tower, but they did not forget the lesson. They began building again, towns, villages, temples, roads, but never another Babel. No tribe dared attempt to reach the heavens through stone and brick. Instead, they sought heaven through wisdom, through ritual, through story. The idea of ascending physically became a symbol of spiritual elevation, not architectural achievement. Humanity had been guided back to the truth that closeness to the divine was not earned by height or strength, but by devotion and humility. Still, the shadow of Babel lingered. Many storytellers said that God feared what humans could achieve, as if the Almighty trembled before bricks and mortar. But older, wiser traditions preserved a deeper understanding. It was not human strength that threatened divine order, but human corruption. If the tower had been completed, humanity would have unified under a system of absolute control, without the capacity for individuality or dissent. The future would have been a single empire stretching across the earth, ruled by those who sought to rival heaven's authority. The destruction of Babel was not a breaking of potential, it was a preservation of free will. Some ancient scribes described the divine act as a mercy that looked like judgment. It resembled punishment, but beneath the surface, it was protection. If humanity had continued on that path, they would have surrendered their souls to earthly rulers long before they ever touched the clouds. Confusion was painful, but it shattered the chains of a doomed destiny. Centuries later, when nations rose and fell, when wars erupted over territory and belief, scholars often blame the scattering for the world's divisions. But they rarely considered the alternative, a world where the tower had succeeded and one ideology ruled all. Diversity brought conflict, yes, but it also brought color, art, innovation, and the many expressions of the human heart. The destruction of the tower ensured that no single people could dominate the rest uncontested. It prevented the birth of an empire that would crush the world under the weight of one vision. From deserts to forests, mountains to islands, humanity grew into the fullness of its potential, each branch of mankind becoming a unique reflection of the divine image. The Fall of Babel became not the end of unity, but the rebirth of identity. A forced unity was replaced with a tapestry of freedom. The dream of the tower had been a counterfeit paradise. Its destruction was the beginning of true humanity. Even now, when the scholars read the ancient text, some still misinterpret it as divine insecurity or jealousy. But the ancient priests and prophets knew better. Heaven does not fear human greatness. Heaven fears human self-destruction. The tower was not stopped because mankind reached too high, but because mankind aimed in the wrong direction. They sought to replace the divine instead of reflect it. And so the ruins of Babel remained in the heart of Mesopotamia, half buried in sand, visited by wanderers and storytellers who felt the echo of something immense. Its broken stones spoke of a lesson older than any empire, that unity without humility becomes tyranny, and ambition without wisdom becomes ruin. Babel was not a failure, it was a warning carved in stone, and the world built after its fall carried the memory of that warning into every kingdom, every tribe, every language, and every dream. In the final moments before the Tower of Babel fell, the world held its breath, though no one realized it. The winds around the structure grew colder, sharper, almost metallic. The sun dimmed, not because clouds passed overhead, but because something far greater shifted above the firmament. The people of Shinar still shouted orders, lifting stones, pulling ropes, pouring tar and bitumen, believing they were on the brink of achieving the impossible. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet had already begun rejecting them, trembling like a living creature refusing to bear their weight. For years they had labored without rest, driven by a single unspoken goal: to make themselves gods in a world that already had one. And with every new level they constructed, with every brick they burned, they moved further away from the humility that once defined humankind. Their pride no longer resembled ambition. It had become a disease, silent, creeping, all-consuming. The tower was not merely a monument to their skill, it had become a monument to their rebellion. This was not building. This was war. Yet even then, God did not strike instantly. The heavens observed, the earth listened, the angels waited. All of creation seemed to be weighing one question: would humanity stop itself before it reached the edge of ruin? But the people no longer heard anything but the echo of their own voices. Their language was unified, their vision aligned, their will unbroken. A single-minded humanity, unstoppable, unhinged, and utterly convinced of their superiority, was far more dangerous than any weapon forged by human hands. Some among them sensed something was wrong. A few laborers on the upper scaffolding whispered that they felt watched. Others reported dreams of stars rearranging themselves into warning signs. Even the animals tethered near the construction site refused to go near the tower's shadow. But the overseers silenced every doubt. Fear, they said, was for the weak. Questions were for the faithless. And so the workers pushed onward, drowning their unease beneath the rhythm of construction. The final crisis began subtly. A mason asked for water, but the man beside him thought he asked for wood. A carpenter shouted for help with a beam, but the workers around him heard only nonsense. Laughter turned to confusion, confusion to frustration. Within minutes, the babble of voices became unbearable words overlapping, meanings dissolving, unity fracturing like broken glass. The workers gestured wildly, desperate to communicate, but their hands shook and their hearts began to race. It felt as though some invisible blade had sliced through the very fabric of their understanding. As language collapsed, cooperation collapsed with it. Groups formed by accident, clusters of people who could still understand one another, separated from those who suddenly sounded like strangers. Panic swept through the tower. Tools dropped, ropes snapped, scaffolding splintered. The great machine that had once moved like a single organism now spasmed and convulsed, unable to hold itself together. And then came the sound, not thunder, not wind, not an earthquake. It was the sound of divine finality, deep, ancient, resonant, as though creation itself exhaled in disappointment. The tower shook from its peak to its foundations, issuing a groan so immense it rattled the bones of every living person nearby. Stones loosened and fell like meteors. Dust erupted in clouds thick enough to choke the sky. Workers screamed in hundreds of different languages, most of them understanding none but their own. The fall was inevitable now. As the structure crumbled, God did not strike with lightning or fire. He simply removed the single thread that allowed humanity to function as one, their shared voice. Without that, the tower was no more than a corpse standing on borrowed time. Level by level, it shattered, sending waves of debris across the plain. Those who survived fled in every direction, carrying fragments of their languages, their families, their memories, and their fear. No one dared look back. When the dust cleared, only ruins remained, jagged, skeletal, half swallowed by the earth. Silence replaced the noise that had once echoed across the valley. The people would later tell stories of what happened, but none would fully understand the truth. The destruction of Babel was not punishment. It was prevention, not wrath, protection. For had humanity succeeded that day, had they truly finished their tower, they would not have simply reached the heavens. They would have torn themselves apart, trying to claim what was never meant for them. God scattered them not to break them, but to save them from a destiny they were rushing toward with blind arrogance. And so the world changed. Languages multiplied, nations formed, cultures diverged. But deep within every people, every tribe, every dialect, one shared memory lingered like a scar. The memory of a tower that nearly unmade humanity before it could even begin. And somewhere, buried beneath the sands of Shinar, the foundations of Babel still rest silent, ancient, and waiting, an eternal reminder of what happens when mankind tries to rise higher than the one who made them.